Okay, good afternoon. I assume everyone can hear us. If not, please send a message by chat to Desmond at the HSBA. This is John Pete Minot. I'm with Senior Counsel Division. And we're here this afternoon welcoming Garret Ho, who is a CPA in town. He's got about 25 years experience as an expert, has been qualified as a forensic accounting expert in disputes, and he is going to talk a bit about his practice and some of the pitfalls and procedural background in handling damages and analyzing financial problems in civil cases for the most part, and some of the uh, long term cases that he's worked on that may be of assistance to those who are members of the bar that need financial consultants or expert CPAs in some of their cases. I've used Garret in the past, and he comes highly recommended. So I will turn it over to Garret, and thank you for showing up today.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for asking me to be here. And you make me sound a lot better than I probably am. Um,
You are.
but I appreciate the vote of confidence. Before I get started today, I know I can't see all of you here, but I want you to swear that nothing that I say here today is going to be used against me in a later cross-examination. Okay, I'm just throwing that out there for all you trial lawyers. Um, as Pete mentioned, I'm a CPA. I have my own firm, and at the moment it's just me. And my core competency is damages, right? Expert witness services, personal injury, lost profits, bankruptcy, valuation, fraud, those type of items. I do some consulting, business consulting, but again, primarily expert witness services. My goal here today is to help all of you uh, get a better product from your experts. Obviously focused on your financial and damages expert, but I think in speaking with other people in my area, we all kind of run across the same issues. So hopefully, what you can get out of this is, save a few bucks, put a few bucks in your pocket because you can do some of these things rather than paying me. Uh, and maybe and hopefully that because you get a little bit more efficient with dealing with some of these areas, um, like your workday gets cut by 15 minutes. I can send you off to go see your family a little bit earlier, or you get to the bar 15 minutes earlier, right? It's an extra beer. So that's kind of what my hope is for today. Um, so well, let's if you don't mind, I'll just jump in really quickly. Okay. Um, see, I don't want to sound self-important here, but I understand that experts can make a big difference in the outcome of a case, both on the liability side and on the damages side, right? And I also understand that relatively speaking, experts can be expensive, right? So because they're both important and expensive, I want you to be able to maximize what you get out of your experts, right? And so that's what I hope these tips will do, um, with the ultimate goal of you getting the best product in the most efficient manner, and that kind of translating to the least amount spent. Okay. I'm also going to give you some observations and the changes to the damages area that have come about in the last few years. And again, I hope that what I share with you today helps with your management of your damages experts, as well as with your other experts. Okay. Um, So the first thing is when you're dealing with experts, engage them early. Okay. And because time is important, right? Um, when you wait to engage until the last minute, you're increasing the odds of a lower quality product. Okay, right? I mean, rushing to complete is never the optimal scenario. Okay, uh, sort of in very practical terms, your financial expert, we're doing really detailed financial analysis. Okay, and our models, they're complex, right? Mechanically, again, we're typing formulas into cells in Excel. We're linking cells. We might be linking documents. Uh, the models are big. They're complex. They're easy to make mistakes, right? So if we're going to rush, it's very easy to make errors, right? Recently did a case where, I worked on about 8 individual damage areas. One area alone had 150,000 lines in Excel worth of data. 2 other areas were 40 and 45,000 lines a piece. So again, it's a lot of stuff to work through, right? So again, when we use Excel, there's a good chance that if we're rushing, errors can happen, right? Sort of unlike Word files where everything is on the surface, right? You read a Word file, right? Grammatical errors, factual stuff, they tend to pop out, right? Because they're right in front of you. Whereas in Excel, uh, you're not going to see a formula unless you're physically clicked on the cell, right? So you're going to see the answer to your formula. If you're just looking at it, you click on the cell and you get to see what's inside, right? So again, for us, when we're proofing, it's hard to see it. You have to check on every single one, and even then, there's multiple places that you're checking. So time is important. Give your expert as much time as you can possibly, um, to do the work. Okay. Um, and I'm sure this next thing, you want to give your expert time to digest the information that's being provided to them, right? To develop sound projections and assumptions, right? Like, by the time you contact us, you folks are pretty well immersed in the cases, right? I think you know all of the aspects pretty intimately. You've had time to talk to the players, review all the documents, understand the issues, right? And for us, we're jumping in cold. And we generally don't have the same amount of time to get up to speed as you folks do. Okay, so again, as much time as possible is helpful. We don't need to uh, develop the same, I guess, competency level with all the facets of the case that you do. But we certainly want to achieve a certain level in order to give you a quality product. Okay. And please also understand that a case that I guess is relatively simple on your end could be very complex for us, right? A guy walking down the street gets hit on the head with an anvil, right? I mean, it sounds pretty simple for you folks, but when I'm looking at it, maybe the guy is 22 years old. He doesn't have a work history. Where is he going to go? Or he has a really complex business whose profits change annually and vary with the phases of the moon, right? So again, liability seems pretty simple there, but for us in analyzing the damages, um, more complex. Okay. I've definitely been in situations where, I hear, yeah, it should be simple, it should be easy. but again, that's not always the case. And for us, until I start peeling back the layers of the onion, I really don't know how many layers there are. Okay. So time. I do want to mention that, time's not going to guarantee you a quality product, or, you might get the same product if you give me a week or if you give me 5. But again, we're trying to improve your odds here. Okay, we're trying to improve the probability that you're going to get something better. Okay. By engaging earlier, we get more time to get more information. I find that, in most cases, what the information that's initially provided to me is insufficient to complete the analysis. Okay. And also, I need more time to review what I do get and to see what's missing. Right. So, give us more time, so that you can identify, so that I can identify, and then you can go and get the documents that we need. Okay. And I'll say it's pretty common that at the end of the day, all the stuff that I want, I don't actually get. All right. So document production and receipt for us is important. Spend some time trying to help us with that. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is, giving me all of the documents that you get. I certainly want the financial documents, the depositions, the answers to interrogatories, other expert reports. Don't hold back because you think I don't need them. Okay. Something that is not necessarily important to you in your area or your focus could be very important to me. Okay. And I know that a lot of guys don't turn over documents to us because you think it saves money, right? Because I'll review those documents, but that's not necessarily true. I might take longer to review all of the documents, simply because I'm dealing with more documents. But it's likely that I'll spend more time reviewing the documents, but my analysis time will be shortened. Okay. Because what happens is when I start with all of the documents, right, I get to see the big picture. Okay. And therefore, so as I start my analysis, the analysis is better reasoned from the beginning, right? I'm not picking up bits and pieces and trying to fit them in, right? I can see the big picture. And it certainly cuts down time for me going down some rabbit hole thinking that some thesis is correct or hypothesis is correct when it's really not. Okay. I can cut those things off sort of at the very beginning. Okay. So as much information as you can give it, you give it, right? Because there is a repercussion to throwing away an analysis. I've definitely been in situations where I get partial information. I work up an analysis only to get additional information that the attorney that retained me had, but didn't provide to me. So I get that new information and I find out that my theory was completely wrong, right? Even a small thing can make the whole theory go bad. So, in that kind of situation, you ended up with almost a double cost for the work, because I had to throw away an entire analysis and assumptions and write-ups. Okay, so we definitely want to cut that down. Give us all the information. Okay. Uh, and I will say that, you send me 4,000 pages worth of somebody's medical history, right? I'm not going to read through every word. I'm not going to look through that with a fine tooth comb. But it's nice to have, and there have been times where, there is something buried in that, in those 4,000 pages that's useful. Okay. So I think most experts, I mean, we understand where we need to spend time looking at stuff. But at least if we have it, it's just a better way to start, and no point in you deciding what we need and what we don't. Okay. Um, Along with documents, I think it's important for you folks to provide me with access to all the players, right? I mean, the clients, right? Their normal professionals, if they have any, right? Like their tax preparers or their auditors or their bookkeepers. Um, those folks, they're the keepers of data, right? And like you guys, right, who know your clients really intimately, right? These professionals, they know them well too, right? So I'm going to have questions that could take me hours to figure out, or maybe never figure out, and their existing professionals just know just like that, right? So give me access to those folks, um, and it'll help with a better product. Uh, if we're dealing with a company situation, um, give me access to the HR professionals, company managers, right? They can explain um, how people get paid, changes to their pay, um, that sort of thing. Okay, and I think finally, um, it's really good to have, for me to have access to all the experts in the other areas. There's definitely overlap in our work, so it's good for us to to be able to speak with those folks. Um, you know, Personal injury matters, right? Your vocational expert and your life care planners, right? Their work ties directly into mine. Being able to speak to them and being able to speak to them early and through the process um, can be very helpful. Okay. Um, uh, I've been talking a little bit about getting information and who I should have access to. So briefly, I want to kind of go over the kind of information I want. And I think with this, even if you don't hire an expert, right? Even if you don't hire me, and you can do some of this on your own, uh, the kind of information is still the same. So it should help you there too. This should help you there too. Okay. Um, Damages, right? Generally, right? Generally going to be uh, a but for versus given scenario, right? But for the injury, you would have earned so much. Given the injury, now you're going to earn so much, right? So when you request information, financial information, that information should kind of reflect that concept, right? Because we want to know what things were like before, and then now what things have changed. Okay. Um, when we're speaking about, say, personal injury or breach of contract, lender liability, all those things come into play, right? So it's a before and an after scenario. Request the information that reflects that. Okay. As a general rule, in an accounting, what you're going to hear is there are general rules and there are exceptions to the rule. Okay. Uh, in general, when I'm looking at historical information, I typically want 3 to 5 years, okay, of historical information before whatever incident, is in question here. Okay. No set time rule, with this, okay, no set time period. It's really professional judgment eventually as to what makes sense in a particular situation. But again, general rule 3 to 5 years. Um, one thing also about accounting is uh, uh, there's a term called relevancy, right? And the further away you get from a point, right, the less relevant the information is. But again, that's case by case. Sort of. I guess to give you an example, recently did a personal injury matter, and plaintiff, the injured party, had been in the same job, in the same position for at least 10 years, right? No, and he wasn't looking for a promotion. That was his gig 10 years long. We happen to get information for 10 years worth of historical earnings. And in the last 5 years, he made about 150 grand a year. But then in the prior 5 year period, he made about 60% of that. Okay. Plaintiff's expert had all 10 years, used the 5 year average to base the but-for earnings scenario. Okay. And again, 5 years is not an unreasonable period of time, generally speaking. Okay. I've certainly worked with less. And, so on the surface, it's not a big deal. But I had to ask myself the question was why were the earnings so so low in the prior 5 year period? Same job, everything the same, except his earnings were lower. So the attorney that I was working with gave me access to one of the company's vice presidents. And what she explained to me was that, and it's a big company, local office based out of the mainland, offices all up and down the West Coast. And what she explained to me was that in Hawaii, they're a very project-based company. So, and their projects, if they get big ones, I mean, they last for years. So when they have them, everybody's busy. They work a ton, but they don't always have these big projects. So there's periods, and she goes, it can even be a decade-long drought where we just don't have the work. So our guys, they'll still get sort of full-time work, but they won't get the overtime, right? And so, so I changed, my analysis to account for the bigger window, which again, and going back to giving access and information, right? Had I not had access to this company vice president, I wouldn't have known. And again, 5 year analysis, 5 year average, pretty reasonable. Okay, so everything changes, but start there and then adjust as necessary. Okay. For the post accident or post incident scenario, get all the financial data you can to current, to where you're sitting at right now. Okay, because we want to know what happens, right? We're going to predict what would have happened, but we want to know what actually happens. So, it doesn't matter. Get it all. Ask for it all the same tax returns, pay stubs, all that stuff. Get it all. Okay. Let's see. So that's your time period, right? Now, what kind of data do we want, right? And whether it's a personal matter or a business matter, right? We want tax returns, and we want financial statements. Okay, they're both annual representations of a person's earnings. Okay, we generally look at periods of a year to base our analysis. Those things are generally produced annually, right? So we want them. Both typically come with an income statement and a balance sheet. Income statement or a tax return earnings, right? You're looking to see how much a person makes during the year. The balance sheet is your statement of financial position. It's going to tell me too how much you're spending on assets in a year, or if you have liabilities in a year. So again, there's a wide range of uses for these documents, and they all vary with the type of case that you have. But again, generally speaking, tax returns, financial statements, all the time. Okay. If you're dealing with a business case, get their general ledgers. Okay. And you can use that term, just say, look, I want your general ledgers for whatever time period we're looking at. Again, 5 years back to current. Okay. And a general ledger is basically all of the financial transactions that happen with a company are recorded into the ledger. Every check that you write, every sale that you make, every time you owe somebody money, everything's recorded in the general ledger. How much money the principals take out, how much dividends a company pays, all of that is recorded in the general ledger. Okay. So you definitely want that if you can get it. Okay. Again, because you never know what's going to be important and what's not. Get the general ledger. One thing I will note for you here is that some systems, when you ask it to print a general ledger, and that's really all you're doing, it's a simple report to generate, right? You go into your accounting system and you say print, and it does it. Sometimes the ledgers print out what's called a batch entry. And, a batch entry is simply a sum total of a bunch of entries. For example, I write 10 checks to vendors in January. The ledger might, instead of showing you 10 individual checks, it's going to show you one entry with the sum total. Okay. Sometimes I don't necessarily think that it's anybody trying to hide stuff. I don't know if you can select whether or not systems batch or if you can choose to batch. But in any event, the way to get around that is there's another thing called a cash ledger. Ask for the cash ledger, and that'll give you the detailed data. Okay. But the general ledger is by far the most important accounting document that you can get. So go get it. We want all the bank statements, canceled checks, and deposit slips, both, maybe not necessarily as important in a personal injury case, but it doesn't mean that there's not something there that's important, again, depending on the scenario. I think people typically ask for the canceled checks, but you might not ask for the deposit slips. Ask for the deposit slips because they're going to tell us what the sources of that cash is, right? Sometimes the source is important, right? And the purpose of it. Somebody could be repaying a loan and you see a deposit, so it's not a sale, right? But if you only get a deposit, you might automatically think it's a sale. Okay, so get the deposit slips if you can. Okay. When you're dealing with an individual, okay, we're going to ask for pay stubs. Okay, everybody asks for W-2s, and W-2s are important, and it's good to have. But pay stubs are more important because they tell you what's been earned in individual categories, right? How much overtime did the person work? How much vacation did they use during a given period? Did their hourly rate of pay change during the period? Did they earn commissions, right? Even for salaried employees, a year end, especially a year end pay stub, is really important, because you might not see a overtime, right? But maybe the person gets a bonus, okay, at the end of the year, right? And so we want to know the difference between um, what a person's typical salary is and what their bonus is, and then we'll have to find out what their bonus is based on. Okay, but if you just get the W-2, you're not going to have any of that information, right? You just know what the person was paid. Okay, and you know, you're expert too. You know, we certainly don't want to get caught in a situation where, you know, we've included 5 years worth of earnings in our average to project the future, only to find out that, you know, in year 4 of our analysis, the person cashed in 5 years worth of vacation time, and it artificially inflated their earnings for a year. Okay, I mean, it's an honest mistake, but you know, we still, you know, don't want to have to go back and redo our analysis and say we were wrong in that scenario. Okay, so get the pay stubs. Um, we also want union contracts. Okay, Hawaii, heavily unionized state. I think in my practice, I can't think of a time where I didn't have at least 2 personal injury cases with union members going at a time. Okay, so the collective bargaining agreements, right? They spell out everything, right? They tell you the rate of pay, how you get paid, what your where you when your pay raises are, um, you know, all of it. So get the current contract and get whatever you can going back as well. Okay. Uh, uh, get documentation of your pension plans, right? Of the pension plan, so that we can see what um, the contribution requirements are and what the how the benefits are calculated. You know, again, I guess, you know, this kind of goes hand in hand with being a really unionized state, is that we still have a lot of defined benefit pension plans out there, right? And those defined benefit plans, right? They're typically calculated based on you know, average salary, years of service, and then some multiplier that's put in there. So we want to know how an injury is going to affect that benefit going forward. Okay. Um, Sort of jumping back into the business world. Um, you guys ask for documents, get receipts of expenses, right? Talked about the general ledger, and the general ledger records, you know, say payment of a receipt or of an expense, or acknowledgement that you owe the money, right? But again, they are just entries into a computer system, right? The receipts provide documentation that what's going into that system, along with the bank statements, is accurate. Okay, so that's kind of things we want source documents, such as receipts. Okay. Sort of continuing on the line of a business related case. You know, if you can get them, if they have them, if they have any business plans, pro forma data, you know, anything that gives me sort of something that they were thinking at the time, right? I want to know what management thought is going to happen with the business going forward at a particular time, right? You know, this can be important for lost profits. And it's certainly important for bankruptcy matters where we're potentially computing solvency at a given period, right? We want to know what their thought was. We know where they ended up, right? We know they ended up in bankruptcy, but you know, going back 2 or 3 years, we want to know what their thought was, what their plans were, so that we can help maybe value the assets at that point. Okay, so get those things. And I think finally, um, anytime you can get board minutes or other internal communications, um, again, sort of discussing the future plans or projections, or, you never know, again, what other kind of communications are in there, but try to get those documents for us to see, um, and so that it helps us, build our model, and make our assumptions. Okay. Um, I think that the final area that I wanted to touch on, because I think it's important to you, or could be important to you, um, are changes that I've seen in the damages area, in the last few years. Okay, I think it'll help you kind of plan and um, help value your cases, going forward. Um, as a general statement, I think that overall the changes that I've seen in the industry, they're good. I I think they provide, um, more flexibility, and options for the trier of fact to make a decision when that time comes. Okay. And one of the big changes that I've seen recently, is that experts are providing, multiple scenarios, multiple damage scenarios. I guess simplistically, like a high and a low scenario. Okay. Where historically, you know, plaintiff chooses one, defense chooses one, and that's it. Right. And I think you can, under those situations, maybe you're cutting off some very reasonable options. Okay. Um, I had a case where I was, retained by plaintiff's counsel, had a young guy, in his early 20s. He was already a professional athlete. Okay. And he wasn't a baseball player, but sort of to use a baseball analogy, he kind of reached like AAA, but he hadn't reached the major leagues yet. Okay, so he was getting AAA money. He wasn't getting major league money, right? And so the question is he does he stay there and that's it? Does he maybe become a coach, right? Or does he make uh the major leagues? And then, right, does he make average major league money, or does he make Shohei Ohtani money? Right. So it's a big question, and it's really hard to judge that. I mean, this isn't a guy that's a stonemason, right? There's a lot of options out there. So in that particular case, what I did was, um, I offered two scenarios, and one was as a professional athlete, and he actually had a fallback plan, and his fallback plan was, his father worked in a union, had worked in the union for years. It was hard to get into, but the father had gotten folks into the union, right? Had used his pull to get people into the union. Um, so that was the fallback plan. So I offered two scenarios, um, and again, I think it works out well, because it's hard to determine whether or not someone would have been ultra successful in a particular, situation. Okay. Um, it's an uncertain future, and we're trying to make reasonable assumptions. So by giving two, I think that helps. Okay. Um, uh, I've also seen folks, give annual cumulative totals for loss. So in other words, if you got a period of loss that you think is at least 10 years, uh, or you think maxes out at 10 years, I got an actual present value calculation after year 1, 2, 3, and so forth. Okay. Again, before, defense picks a period of time, plaintiff picks a period of time, and that's it. Sometimes they're the same, oftentimes they're not. Um, right? But by giving multiple scenarios, we give the trier of fact an opportunity to make their decision, right? Sort of, for example, we had a wrongful termination case, right? And in a wrongful termination case, right, the person isn't physically injured, right? Wrongfully terminated from their job, right? But not physically injured and is still actually capable of doing the same job, right? But the question is, how long does that termination, affect them, right? And so in that case, what I did was I ran the damages out till the end of her statistical work life, and that was like 20 years away. But then gave an annual cumulative total, and because it is reasonable to also assume that at some point she's going to mitigate her losses, right? As it turns out, arbitrator came back and said, well, I'm not going to give 20 years, but I'm going to give 10, right? And so he already had a built-in present value number calculated, gave the 10, it was easy, done deal. So again, I think it gives the trier of fact some options there. Because again, it's difficult to determine, when somebody's lost capacity changes in a wrongful termination case. And similarly, in a business case, if their reputation has been damaged, right? Some restaurant serves something and a bunch of people get salmonella poisoning. How long does that affect their loss, right? It's challenging to say, or in fact, some options to say what's reasonable. Okay. Um, and 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 sort of, I guess the last kind of change, and this is kind of related, is I feel like experts now give fewer extremes. When I first came into this industry, 25 years ago, again, sort of going back to this, right? Plaintiff on one side, defense on the other, they were extreme, right? And if we think about a bell curve, I don't know if any of you remember this from your stats class, right? You have a bell curve that kind of does this, right? And say 80% of the outcomes fall in this little window right here, like within 10% of each other. And then you got these two set of extremes on the very end. Well, like I said before, guys will come in on the extremes, but now, and maybe it's a function of being able to offer multiple scenarios, right? More people are ending up towards the middle. Okay. And again, so when I look at it, the sort of the defense's high end and the plaintiff's low end, they're pretty close. They're pretty close. I mean, we're generally talking like 10, 20% kind of close, where before, it would be like plaintiff would say 10 million and defense would say 0. Okay. So we're trying to, it does seem like it's coming back, and people are making more reasonable estimates and more reasonable projections overall. Okay. And a lot of things too, I think a big part of why we want the trier of fact to have a few more options is, that individual or individuals will have more access to information than we do, right? And they have their own interpretation of what's believable and what's not. Okay. And I think the primary thing there is trial testimony, right? I mean, they have the benefit of listening to what a witness says on the stand. And I'm not talking about the financial experts, but parties or fact witnesses or whatever it is, the trial fact gets to listen to that and make their own determination of, who's more believable. And that in turn affects the damages calculations, right? And so sometimes by just giving extremes, um, that option isn't necessarily there for them, or it's not easy for them to decipher that extreme. Okay. I don't really have much more here, or actually, I don't have anything else. I think I've talked for longer than I planned to talk. So thank you. I mean, if there's any questions, you
Yeah,
know,
Garrett, I did have one question. If you run into uh, situations where you're asked to be a consulting expert versus a testifying expert and limitations that you have in contracts or the amount of information that you may get from attorneys or clients when they're not sure if they want to use you as a testifying expert, so they may want to just limit it to a consulting expert. I mean, I assume you run into that situation.
yeah, and we do, Pete, and I think generally speaking, and the way that it's written into my engagement letter, um, is it always the engagements always start as a consulting expert, and then should you decide that you need me to testify, then the engagement sort of naturally morphs into that. I don't necessarily think that the information that I'm provided changes. Um, as a practical matter, maybe the form of the way information is provided to me might change. I might not see a document, but I might be asked to assume a certain um, outcome, or make certain assumptions at first, and then later on firm it up with actual documents if it morphs into a testifying situation.
Right. So the concern would be, if you are a testifying expert, anything that you received and reviewed, even as in your consulting capacity, may be discoverable. So you may have some situations where you are limited in what people will give you if they know you're going to be a testifying expert as opposed to just a purely consulting expert. There's some practical.
Yeah, as a practical matter, I do think that's true. I don't, where it hasn't been my experience. Well, you know what, I actually can't say this, but I don't think it's been my experience that um, even as a testifying expert, that people are um, purposefully withholding information from me that could affect my findings. And I wouldn't appreciate that. I'm a pretty straight shooter, as far as that stuff goes. Um, I'm not going to hide it. If I do get it, um, it's listed on my information considered, whether or not the information that I get actually factored into my opinion. If I get it, I let everybody know that I got it.
Yeah, thanks. I see there's a question on the chat sidebar. Question is, what was the description of the type of documents that show benefits, like benefit plans or statement of benefits you mentioned?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think there's an actual sort of official name, right? It just changes by whoever's doing it. Um, sometimes it's a summary of benefits. But everybody, the union guys, for example, they at some point they all get at least a booklet that has a description of the plan in them. Okay, and again, the name itself changes. I think like if you throw Google into uh, like the Hawaii employees retirement system, if you just throw that in there, like they'll come up with a pamphlet off of their website, and it has everything. So yeah, so no stated, no specific name, just something to be descriptive, I guess, is a benefit plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I don't see any other questions on chat, and since we can't see who's in the gallery, I don't think they're speaking. But I'll ask Desmond if he has any other questions that have been submitted by anyone.
Yeah, so there isn't any questions in chat, but If you have any questions, feel free to add them in chat, and then Garrett will be able to answer them. But Garrett, did you want to maybe give a contact information to our listeners today?
Oh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. What's the sorry, Desmond, what's the easiest way for me to, is it just to
Yeah, so you can put like your email address in our chat box.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, it showed up.
Okay. Answer it all the time.
Great. All right. Well, we thank you very much, Garrett, for taking the time out for the coffee hour and appreciate all your insights. And hopefully, this will assist persons who are looking for a financial expert that they would need in one of their cases or otherwise for just plain business or other types of disputes. So, thank you very much for your time.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. Again, I hope it helps. I hope it
Yeah,
helps.
and thank you all for attending who are out there. We can't see you, but we know you're out there.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.